Dear friends, this is an edited recording of a meeting of the section for the Literary Arts and Humanities of the School for Spiritual Science in North America that occurred on April 22nd, 2022. This was the meeting in which we celebrated William Shakespeare's birthday. At this meeting, we discussed Volume 271 in the collected works of Rudolf Steiner, published by Steiner Books, a volume with the title Art and Theory of Art, Foundation of a New Aesthetics. Section member Clifford Venho, who is on the Section Leadership Council, worked on this book as an editor and translator. The themes and topics discussed in these collected lectures and essays by Rudolf Steiner are quite important to our section as we look forward to the planned conferences in San Francisco and Toronto in 2024. Our section name, after all, in German, translates literally as the Section for Beautiful Sciences. Now, that's an 18th century Central European term that does not speak clearly to a global contemporary English-speaking audience. And so, when the section was refounded and re-enlivened in North America at the beginning of the 21st century, our section received the English name Literary Arts and Humanities. But beauty lives in that name as spirit guide and being to inspire our activities and method of working. Our section leader in Dornach, Christiane Heid, has written often about this topic, beauty, and I refer you to a recent essay by Christiane that you can find on the North American section website, theliteraryarts.com. This 20-minute video lecture from the section meeting on April 22, 2022, is one of several companion contributions to that essay arising from the North American section work. It is another contribution, I would say, toward our discussion of beauty in relationship to the meaning and purpose of our section, and thereby the relationship of beauty to the meaning and purpose of spiritual science in our 21st century. The April 22nd meeting was quite far-ranging and improvisatory, and this excerpt begins in the middle of things. This is an edited recording of the meeting discussion and the meeting's unprepared comments. It's not a lecture. A companion video lecture that arises from this same April 22nd meeting is the video already posted titled The Dark Forest, in Search of Ars Poetica. I do believe that both videos will be useful as we look toward the North American section conferences planned for 2024 and for 2025. Okay then, here we go, and we'll start right in the middle of things as we dive into the contents of the book Art and Theory of Art. Everything was already well underway. Just the table of contents, and to point out just a few important things to have in mind as you approach this material. One might say that this material that deals with aesthetics and literature and those things which really concern our section directly in the literary arts and humanities, these all come from a period of Rudolf Steiner's biography, which is, I would say, rather not so well known. It's that period of time about 15, maybe 20 years, thereabouts, in the very end of the 19th century, right before he discovered his true audience of theosophists. And you know that story, how that happened, how he went to give the lecture on the green snake and the beautiful lily to an audience of theosophists, and they were so excited that they kept inviting him back, and pretty soon he was on this path with theosophy, which was really a new departure for him at the time, because previously he was really trying to establish himself, by all appearances, as a voice and a contributor to the discussion in the literary world, such as it was at the time. You know, he was the editor of a literary magazine. He wrote many, many reviews, which have been collected. He was quite active in terms of belles lettres, starting around, I don't know, 1880 or thereabouts, going right up to 1900. It seems like he was really trying to make his mark in that world. One might say somewhat unsuccessfully, because he ended up shifting to the world of theosophy and later anthroposophy instead. But this period of time when he was very involved with the literary arts is extremely significant. That's why I just wanted to draw your attention tonight, once again, to a meeting that we had not that long ago on March 6, 2021, about a year ago now, when we discussed his first address. He was very, very proud of this. And in fact, he said, you can read about it on the webpage here. I'll scroll down to it. Why don't I do that? He said very explicitly that, here it is in the quote, "This work of mine, of more than 20 years standing, can be published today without the alteration of a single sentence. On reading through this lecture, the ideas developed in it appear to me to be a healthy foundation for anthroposophy." So he clearly was quite proud of this first address and saw it as foundational. And, you know, we've talked several times in our meetings, many times, about how you have Goethe at the beginning of anthroposophy as one bookend, Goethe and this theory of aesthetics. And at the other end, the other bookend of Rudolf Steiner's career, you have Novalis. And between Goethe and Novalis, you have anthroposophy. And that's one of the ideas we played with in this meeting on March 6th. Another idea that I wanted to just remind everyone of, and it's something that Patricia brought into the meeting back when we were meeting in the living room here, and it was extremely helpful. This idea about the beautiful soul, which we find, for example, in Goethe's novel. And when we had a meeting a while ago in the living room, Patricia brought in this article. I'll just read the quote here again, because there's something I want to tie it to in the book that we're talking about. Here's the quote. "In a global culture that appears increasingly obsessed with radical individualism, narcissistic presentations of self, and incendiary political rhetoric, it is hard to imagine that society once cared about the beauty of the soul. But in the late 18th and early 19th centuries in Germany and across Europe, the pursuit of a beautiful soul became a cornerstone of philosophical thought and popular discourse, advanced by some of the most important intellectuals of the time, including Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Friedrich Schiller, Wilhelm von Humboldt. To these thinkers, the pursuit of inner perfectibility responded to the horrors of the French Revolution's irrational mass action, culminating in the terror of the 1790s. We've talked about that too. The French Revolution and what was going on at the time made people very disquiet. And so there was this reaffirmation of beauty as partly as a result, and this idea of the beautiful soul, and the importance, a reevaluation of aesthetics and what it means, what art really means in a spiritual sense, in terms of freedom for the spiritually active human being. That all comes into the conversation as a result of the reaction to the extremely uncentering events of these revolutionary years. nascent notions of democracy, they believed, could be developed only if each individual achieved liberation from what Immanuel Kant described as self-incurred tutelage of intellectual immaturity by developing cognitive and emotional faculties through aesthetic experience. That little quote by Kant is from a very short essay that I don't think we've ever discussed. It's called What is the Enlightenment? We really probably should. I'll put that on my list of things to do. It's very short. It's very easy to read. It's not like you think Kant would be. And basically Kant affirms the Enlightenment spirit as a spirit of the time which frees us from superstition, ignorance, delusion, or what Kant calls self-incurred tutelage by authorities who really have no bearing calling themselves authorities. It's this mood of freedom and spiritual self-actualization which lives so strongly in the 18th century, and which of course lives in Kant and Fichte and Novalis and Goethe, and reflects itself outwardly in these events like the French and the American Revolution and Mary Wollstonecraft and so forth and so on. And it's all tied. What the interesting point for us in our section is, it all relates very, very directly and importantly to this idea of aesthetics. And you have to, just in a very broad stroke tonight, philosophically speaking, you're moving from a time in philosophy, let's say started by Plato and Aristotle. Let's say that for convenience's sake, in which philosophy was really concerned with the what of things. You know, Plato is like, well, what is really truly spiritual and real? Is it here? Is it there? Is it in the spirit? What is it? Where is it? What is it? You know, and Aristotle, of course, you know, very much concerned with the what of things and how you classify and how you develop, you know, hierarchies of order among the known objects of the world. And in Aristotle's day, he really could know everything. Nowadays, you can't, but he probably could have known everything such as existed in his circumscribed world at the time. But they were very interested in the what, the what. When you get into the time of Kant, Kant shifts the emphasis in philosophy from what to how. How do we know things? That's what's important to Kant, not what is known, but how we know it. What's going on in our brain, in our mind, in the spiritual constitution of the human being. The how, the philosophy of knowing, this becomes the dominant, and still is the dominant concern. It's why everybody's interested in Tibetan Buddhism and all these things that we currently are concerned about, all flow out of this moment of change, this revolutionary time, this change from the questioning of the what to the questioning of the how. The same thing happens in philosophy. And that's why aesthetics becomes so very, very important, and why Rudolf Steiner was drawn to it like a moth to a light in the latter part of the 19th century. It was a dominant concern because it appeared to people that aesthetics was the forum in which this could be made clear and it could be played out. Accent on the word play there, thinking about Friedrich Schiller for a moment, you know, how play is the freest activity of the human being. And then, as we saw in our earlier meetings, how that loops into this idea of free artistic play. Now, here's where I'm going with this for a moment. And again, just let me do a screen share once again and go back to our table of contents. This is what I want to show you. Here in the very first essay, which you should go read again, we've read it before, but if you have time, read it again. This is one of the ones you really have to read. Rudolf Steiner's first address. You've all read his last address, I'm sure multiple times. You have to read just as many times his first address. Otherwise, you're coming in at the end of the play. You don't know what happened at the beginning. What's the arrow pointing at? By 1918, Rudolf Steiner is talking about the congruency of clairvoyancy and art. This is a huge step
Because from an anthroposophical perspective, there is no more significant sign of the times, one might argue, than the fact that so many people these days are doing art and doing it wholeheartedly and doing it enthusiastically and tearing down the inner barricades or boundaries or that corral that we all have in our mind that tells us, no, we shouldn't go there. We're not good enough. We shouldn't try to write a poem. That's for poets. I know I'm not one. That is such baloney from the standpoint of anthroposophy and what Rudolf Steiner is trying to do. One might argue. Now, I'm taking an extreme position here just to light things up a moment. But if the assumption is in knowledge of higher worlds, that all of us have access to these higher spiritual realities, the same assumption from an aesthetics point of view is applied to, say, the painting of pictures, the writing of poetry, the doing of art generally. And that's what we see linked on this page here that the arrow is pointing to, this linkage of clairvoyance and art. And look what he says, I underlined it here, in the lecture given in 1920, in the summary, in the contents. The art of the future, direct presentation of the supersensory. You could really have a whole college year or more built on that sentence, direct presentation of the supersensory. I remember when I was in the foundation year, Renee made a comment one time that really got my attention. He said, I don't know what he was talking about or why he said it, but what I remember is he said, the writers of the future will have to learn how to write about what happens in sleep and during death. Something to that effect. He certainly said sleep. Maybe I added death. But, I've been working with novelists, so, it's on my mind. Because certainly that was on Novalis's mind, by the way. How does a writer represent these realms of the supersensible, so-called, which are the realms of sleep, death, and deep mythological knowing? This turn to the well of deep mythology, which occurs in the early part of the 20th century. In modernism, in high modernism, an example there, of course, is Joyce and many others, Yeats, you could list them all out. Just wanted to suggest some of these things tonight to kind of pique your interest, so to speak, on this topic of aesthetics. If you see the importance of aesthetics in terms, as Rudolf Steiner pointed out, I read you that quote, how important it was to him to study aesthetics and Goethe's understanding of aesthetics as a foundation for his later clairvoyant science of anthroposophy. If you see that relationship, then you have a door to walk through that isn't necessarily perceived as being there by other people, but it is there. It's certainly there. It's this door that leads to what he calls here the supersensory. How you define that, how you play that out, what that means. It's a theme that's coming into the so-called Western conversation at this time of early Romanticism in which Novalis lives, that Rudolf Steiner was really very, very interested in. He says the fairy tale of the green snake and the beautiful lily is the germinal seed of the anthroposophical movement. If he says that, you have to take it seriously and see what Goethe's fairy tale is the foundation, the germinal seed. What are we talking about here? Anyway, I wanted to mainly draw your attention to this span between 1888 and the late years of his life in Dornach, and how this theme is continuing and how it becomes enhanced. And finally, just to close, here's what I'm looking for. Goethe, of course. Goethe. Nourish yourself on being. and be happy. Oh, what a lovely Buddhist sentiment that is, eh? Nourish yourself on being and be happy. Great for the Easter mood, is it not? Okay, we shared. I'm going to close my rant here with this poem by Goethe, which we shared at the meeting that this web page summarizes, and it's a late life poem that he wrote. You all know it. I've read it before. You've all read it many a times. We could look at Darby O'Gill. That would be fun. Maybe we'll do that, but not yet. Legacy by Johann Goethe. Let me just read it. It's so good. It's like the Ninth Symphony. No being can crumble into nothingness. The eternal continues to stir in all things. Nourish yourself on being and be happy. Being is eternal, for laws preserve the living treasures with which the universe has adorned itself. Mm. The truth was discovered long since and has created an alliance of noble minds. Hold on to the old truth. Son of earth, thank the wise man who showed it the path by which it circles the sun and showed that path to its siblings. Now, immediately turn your thoughts inward. There you will find the central point about which no noble-minded human being can have doubts. There you will find no rule missing, for the independent conscience plays the role of the sun to your ethical day. Next, you have to trust your senses. What? Next, you have to trust your senses. They do not allow you to observe anything incorrectly if your understanding keeps you alert. Cheerfully make observations with fresh eyes and walk firmly but with suppleness through the meadows of a richly endowed world. Make moderate use of abundance and plenty. Let reason be at hand in every place where life enjoys life. Then the past will be of permanence. The future will come to life in advance, and the present moment will be eternity. And once you've finally succeeded and have been permeated with the feeling that only what is productive is true, then you can probe the doings of society, which will operate according to its own rules. Associate yourself with the smallest number of people. As of old, the philosopher and the poet created in silent seclusion a labor of love in pursuance of their own will. So you, too, will obtain the highest favor, for to have a presentiment of what noble souls will someday accomplish is the most desirable function of the human being. What an anthem.
Puppets in search of an author, search of a thing.
Yeah, right. There you go. Now that's inspired, right? It sounds familiar, but it's a good idea. Okay, puppets.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, wow.
These are rather recent pictures. Probably by Judith.
Yeah, I think that's the Judith Day.
This was when Judith had all her puppets here.
Oh, look at it. Yeah. Oh. Love it.
Maybe she'll mind.
I'm getting to it, but this I just have to go with it.
It's not Dale on the floor, is it?
It is Dale.
Yeah, that's his day.
Oh,